Hello everybody, welcome back. This is Mandy from Hope Designs, and I have had a lot of questions from viewers asking how I mix my pouring medium and the ingredients for my blooms. I always list what I use in the description box, but I understand, especially for people who may be starting out with blooms, a demonstration is helpful. So I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible. I'm going to show you the three main things I use, and I will mix up at least a pigment and a paint, probably a fluid paint at least, and a Prizm pour paint with you today. I'll also give you a tip that I learned from Erica Hughes that should help stabilize your blooms and make them hold their cells a little bit better. It's a little bit more of an advanced tip, but I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible. So I'm not going to show you every type of pillow paint. I'm just going to stick to the white one, kind of stick to the basics for now, for the sake of brevity, because these kind of videos can be really long. So I have one way back in the archive somewhere, but it has been a minute. So I'm sorry if I'm talking loud. I'm right next to the camera right now because I need to be able to see what you guys can see before we get started. First of all, I have taken Shelley's course. Shelley is an amazing artist, and I'm thankful for the course. I do get asked a lot if it's worth taking the course. I believe so. I mean, you have to decide that for you personally. I know it took me a little bit of time to take the course myself because I wanted to learn. I'm going to put a piece of paint right here so this camera has a place to focus. I wanted to make sure I could afford it at the time. I was just getting started in fluid art. So I understand some people want to learn it first before taking the plunge and doing the course. I get that. I do have a 15% off code that may be beneficial. I don't always list it, but I will list it in this video in case you decide that you want to take the class. One thing I will say is you can learn the bloom technique from watching various artists. You absolutely can. But one thing that is unique to this particular technique is it is a little bit of an advanced technique, and people are continuing to learn all the time. And a lot of times the ingredients that you learn and you get your recipe down with will all of a sudden change and not be available anymore. That's happened a couple of times. So that's where I really think being part of the group is helpful. You also learn from other artists in your country. I'm in the United States, so you may not have the same ingredients, right? So Shelley's in Australia, so a lot of the ingredients that she uses we don't have here. So anyway, I'm going to share what works for me. She has graciously allowed us to share the three parts of the bloom, which, you know, she really kind of did before. So this is not my attempt to teach you the bloom technique. I do the blooms all the time on my YouTube channel, so you're always welcome to learn whatever you can glean from that. So I'm not trying to teach the technique, I'm just teaching you what mixing tips work for me, using the ingredients that I have. And lots of people are different. There is more than one way to mix and more than one pouring medium that will work. In the future, I will probably show you some varieties of things that will work as well. But for today, I'm just going to show you one of the simplest things that works for me with ingredients that I have access to. So there are three components to the bloom recipe. The first one is called the pillow. The pillow is just the house paint that you put underneath your colors, your puddles of colors. The purpose of the pillow is to help your design glide across your surface. It basically acts as a pillow for your design. That's probably why it has that name. But for the sake of simplicity, your pillow is your house paint base. It does not have to be white, but I'm only going to show you the white today. Anytime I use a different color on a video, I always tell you what it is. For practicing, sometimes I buy pillow paint that is like mist tints, and I take chances with pillow paint that I don't know. just because I might be able to get it for $9 a gallon versus, 30 or whatever. So your pillow paint in the United States should generally be an eggshell or a satin finish. Semi-gloss does work, but sometimes it's a little too slippery. So I use Glidden Premium Eggshell. I have used semi-gloss before and it worked okay. I like eggshell better. I will say it has quite a few bubbles. So the best way to make this work is to separate some in a smaller container so that the bubbles have a way to come out. So what I typically do is I will take some and put it aside in a smaller container. I'll pour some into like a red Solo cup using a funnel, and then I'll put it into a smaller container. I do find that pouring it out of this container versus using the squeeze bottle part seems to help with the bubbles, but I have it in here. I'm not going to mix it here because I already have some mixed up, but I will show you the consistency of it. It is kind of thick. Let me make sure you can see me. Sorry, I'm short. I'm having to stand on a stool. So I will make sure that you can see the consistency of it. It's thick, but it still will run off the stick. So it's nice because you can still get your design to move, but it holds its shape pretty well. Now, some people ask me if I put anything in my pillow. Some people put GAC 800 in their pillow to help with crazing. I don't do that. A lot of great artists do that. I don't. I find that crazing has more to do with how much you put on your base and how much you tilt off than it does with your pillow paint, but I mean, all of your ingredients can play a part. Some other people have dealt with the bubbles by, I think Lisa Marvin said that she left it out and just left it open for several days. And basically a lot of the bubbles rose to the surface. She peeled the paint skin off and it worked better for her. I feel like if I were to leave it open, it would end up with random things in it. Dust flying through the air, some dog hair. So this is what I do. Sometimes I'll even put it in a Solo cup and put some saran wrap over it and put a rubber band around it, knowing I'm planning to use it in the next couple days, and that has worked really well for me. So that's what I use. Now this is base 1. You don't need a deep base pillow. You just need a regular house paint. Interior is preferable. It shouldn't necessarily be exterior house paint. So that's your pillow. The purpose of the pillow is it needs to be thick enough to allow your paint to move around without your paint just going right into the middle of it. But you don't want it to be super, super thin because then it won't hold the shape on top of it very well. Now your pouring medium, which isn't the greatest term for this because a pouring medium is really more like a Liquitex or a Golden. But what we do to make a pouring medium is we combine untinted, deep base, semi-gloss, and in some cases high gloss, house paint. So I use Infinity Gold by Sherwin-Williams. You can get this at Lowe's. Base C, and it should say this, must be tinted. It's interior semi-gloss. This is expensive, but it works really, really well. So that's what I use. You're going to use a combination of the interior house paint untinted. It's going to say ultra deep base, or base C in most cases. I use that with varnish. I prefer Jo Sonja gloss varnish, and I usually use about a 3-to-1 ratio, so 3 parts of the untinted to 1 part gloss varnish. You can also use Minwax Polycrylic Clear Gloss in place of Jo Sonja. This is more watery, so you just have to be aware that it may be thinner than this. So I find I get really good cell reaction with this, but I have used both and they both work. So we're already 10 minutes in and I'm just yakking it up. The last layer is your cell activator. I use Australian Floetrol. I know it's expensive. There are ways to make US Floetrol work. I know that Jody has mixed it with just Amsterdam paint and done really, really well. Arisaroo has a great recipe using US Floetrol. Sheldon recently from Sheleeart mixed US Floetrol and water and Amsterdam paint. So there are ways to make it work. I just prefer the simplicity of Australian Floetrol just because I don't want to spend all that time mixing. Doesn't mean I won't ever try those, but if I have it, I'm going to use it. You can get US Floetrol at hardware stores and of course make that work. But the Australian Floetrol, you can buy it on places like eBay and all of that. It will take some time to get. I also do have a link below with a discount code where you can purchase it in the United States. So look for that below. It'll save you 15% off. So typically your cell activator is the top, and your cell activator is the top tiny little petal you put and you blow it out over your design. So the term cell activator typically has to do with the bloom recipe. It has started to be used in other pours, which can be confusing. In traditional acrylic pouring, you get cells a number of different ways. You can get it by using Floetrol, you can get it by using silicone. In the bloom technique, the cell activator is what you put on the top that you blow out over your design, and it reacts with what's underneath it and produces the cells. Now, Australian Floetrol and Amsterdam paint are going to be cell reactive in any type of pour, but I'm not going to say that you can just use Australian Floetrol and Amsterdam paint and get cells the same with any traditional acrylic pour that you can get with the bloom recipe, because they do react to the paint underneath it and the varnish and all of that. So it doesn't mean you can't, just know that not all of your ingredients are transposable with everything else that you use. I'm trying to figure out if I said that the right way. Okay, so I already showed you kind of what the consistency of the pillow paint is. I'm going to show you how I mix the pouring medium, and I'm going to do a small batch with you. The other thing I was going to show you is this is one thing to be aware of when you're dealing with untinted deep base house paint, is not all of them are truly untinted. Some of them have a little bit of titanium white in them, and when you're using colors, especially pigments, that causes your color to be muted and more pastel, and you lose a lot of your color brightness and saturation if you don't use a good untinted paint. So just be aware that you might go find an untinted house paint and be like, jackpot, but they're not all going to work the same. This one, the Infinity, dries perfectly clear. Another one that dries perfectly clear, this you can get at Home Depot, is the Bare 8300 Deep Base. It's also untinted. The only thing about this, it's wonderful, but it is very thick. So I'm not going to mix this one today, but I do sometimes mix 2 parts of the Infinity, 1 part of this, and then 1 part of Josonia. That is one way to make that work. If you bought a whole bunch of that Bare and you're like, it's just too thick, it's not going to go to waste. You just might have to manipulate your recipe a little bit. But for the sake of not confusing everyone, I'm not going to do that today. Today, I'm going to mix up the pouring medium, and I really hope I can do this all in one video, because this feels like it's going to be a really long video. But I know for me, I will watch a long video and keep referring back to it if it's going to help me mix my paint. So now another question that usually confuses a lot of people is, what do people mean when they say this part of that and this part of that? A part, just like if you have 4 parts and you're using a tablespoon, and I say 3 parts of one thing to 1 part of another, that means 3 tablespoons of this to 1 tablespoon of this. So the part is just whatever measurement you're using. I know that can be really confusing, but that's all that means. So if I'm using 3 parts of the Sherwin-Williams Infinity to 1 part Jo Sonja, that means I'm using 3 tablespoons of this and 1 tablespoon of this. I will say your ratios are really just a guide. They are not a perfect science. You will have to adjust your ratios based on the product that you're using, the paint that you're using, the climate that you're in. Warm climate makes thinner paint. Cold climate makes thicker paint. So all of those things are a factor. So let's get messy, huh? You should always stir it up before you use it because paint naturally settles. So I know that this is not the most earth-shattering video you're ever going to see, but hopefully it helps you guys. So for the sake of this being simple, I'm going to do 3 parts of this. And this is very thick, so I get a popsicle stick and I scoop it out. You can also use like one of these paddles, but popsicle sticks are a little bit longer, so for mixing this, I prefer to do that. So I'm going to do 3 parts of this. I'm going to put 2 batches in here. So I'm going to do 6 tablespoons and 2 tablespoons of the Jo Sonja. If I were to use polycrylic, I would probably use a little bit more of the Untinted house paint because, again, it's thinner. If your mix is too thin, it will not hold its shape. So it might be easier to blow out and you might be like, wow, I have the ticket. But it will not hold your bloom structure as well as if it's just the right amount of thickness. You don't want it too thick either because then it won't move and it will crack. So that was 3. Let me not get too distracted. This is 4. And this does take a little bit, so sorry, I know it's boring, but I feel like if I just have it mixed for you, then you don't see the mixing part. And for some people, that is really important. When I first got started, I watched every artist I knew, what they mixed, what they used, and what their consistency looked like. That's 5. Some people ask how long you can use your pouring medium. You're going to get a lot of answers on that. I mix a pretty big batch, well, about 3 times this much at once, and then I put it in containers that have an airtight seal, and I use it for several weeks. It just helps me. Otherwise, if I have to do this every single time, I'm probably not going to paint as much. So now we're going to use the gloss varnish. I will say your cell activator is a little bit more sensitive on the shelf life. Some people will say they only use it within a couple days. So 1 part of this and another part of this. So that's 3 to 1 ratio. So 3 parts of the Infinity to 1 part Jo Sonja. I use cell activator sometimes up to a couple weeks. I've used it up to a month. It does not perform as well, but sometimes it will perform pretty well. If you've let it go too long, you can probably get away with using it in a swipe, but maybe not an actual bloom. So if your cell activator gets too old and you're like, that's Australian Floetrol, I'm not wasting it, put it in a Dutch pour bottle and use it in a Dutch pour. So it's not going to be completely wasted. So that's what I do for this. I'm going to set this aside and just show you what the consistency looks like, because again, this video is already really long, and then I'll clean this in a minute. So I use these little Dixie cups because it's easy to scrape everything out. Now the 3 to 1 ratio of the Infinity to the Jo Sonja is almost perfect in my opinion. I use a lot of primary elements, pigments. I also use a lot of fluid paint in the bloom recipe. I do use tube paint, but I generally stick with a soft body or a fluid most of the time, just because they work really well in this recipe. If your mixture is too thick, let's say you added a tube paint and it added too much body, which is what makes it too thick, then you can thin it down a couple of ways. So I'll go over that really quickly, but let me show you up close what your consistency, what I like to use. I'm not going to say that it's the tell-all because that's different for everybody, but this is the consistency that I like. It looks watery on camera, and what you probably can't see is it's leaving quite a trace on the top. And this will also thicken up a little bit over time. So it takes probably 5 seconds or so to disappear in there. There are some that are just so thick that you can barely get your paint to move once you mix it up. So keep in mind, this has no paint in it, no pigments in it. And this also gives me room to add body if I need to. So this is the more advanced tip. You don't have to do this. But when you use a lot of pigments, pigments have mica in them, and because they, so even primary elements, which is a dry paint system, if you mix it into here, it works great. Sometimes adding a little extra body helps stabilize your cells so they hold their structure. So you can add a little bit of golden heavy gel gloss, just a little bit, when you mix those up, if you need to thicken them. Or if you just want to help stabilize your mixture so it holds its shape better. So that's kind of a more advanced tip, and I learned that from Erica Hughes. She has a great mixing video out there, but I just want to go over that because I may do that when we do the pigments. So I just totally lost my train of thought. Okay, so I will show you kind of how to mix these into various things. But before we do that, I'm going to mix one cell activator with you so that we cover all 3 parts of the bloom first. So let's talk cell activators for a little bit. Not all acrylic paint works well as a cell activator. And if I sound like I'm yelling, I'm sorry, I'm really close to the camera. You can make a lot of them work. Jody from The Painted Dreamer has a great video out there where she tested a bunch of them. And we were all pleasantly surprised to find that even like Glycrylic in some cases works as a cell activator. But they don't all work the same. I told you guys I was going to tell you how to thin down your pouring medium if it's too thick. And then I changed topics. Sorry, I had an ADD moment. If your pouring medium is too thick, you can either add more gloss varnish, or you can mix 3 parts of your Jo Sonja to 1 part water and add that instead of straight water, because then you're still going to have the structure of the gloss varnish, because the gloss varnish is pretty thick. But you'll have a little bit of water, but you're really only introducing a little bit of water at a time. So what I do is when one of these runs out, I save the bottle and I put something on the top. And then I fill another bottle, 3/4 of the way with this, and then 1/4 with water. When I use tube paints, if they are too thick, I will add a couple of drops in at a time, stir, 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 stir. And then when I get the right consistency, I stop. You don't want to put a whole bunch of it in there because then it's going to break down your paint. You just worked really hard to get a good solid paint. You don't want to break it down like that. That's a tip I learned from Sheleeart, and it works really well. The other thing that you can do is put a little bit of this in a bottle, because this has the consistency of like a little bit thicker than water, and add a couple drops of this to thin it down. Sometimes I don't like to put too much different stuff in my mixture, but it's just really a matter of preference. I've done both. So I have a bottle of this in an old buy container, and I use it if I need to. I've thinned them down both ways. So that's one of the things that you can do. So if your consistency is off, you can always thicken it up or thin it down. So that's the pouring medium. And let me get a container for the cell activator, and we'll mix up some lamp black together. All right, so what I was telling you is not all cell activators are created equal. Or acrylic paints for cell activators are created equal. You want to shake your Floetrol really, really well. The one thing I will say is Australian Floetrol is wicked expensive, but you don't use very much. It took me a year to get through one of these, and I paint a lot. So the more you experiment, the more you're going to use, but that's one thing to consider. I like to put a little bit of Floetrol in and then paint. So I'm going to do 3 parts of this to 1 part of this. Most people do between 3 and 4 parts of this to 1 part paint. Not everyone is the same. So I'm going to put 1 in first, and then after I have 1 part in, I bring my paint in and I mix that up really well before I add the other 2 parts. So this is Amsterdam Lamp Black. Most Amsterdam paint works well as a cell activator. Most Golden heavy body paint works well as a cell activator. Most Atelier interactive paint works well as a cell activator. Not necessarily all. Most Matisse works well as a cell activator. What else have I used? Golden. That's mostly what I use. But I have not had success with, you know, like a Liquitex. Some people have. I have not. So I'm not going to tell you to do something I haven't tried yet, because you might be like, jackpot, I'm going to buy a bunch of Liquitex and it may not work well for you, and then you might be mad at me. So I'm just going to tell you what works well for me. Amsterdam's probably the easiest and the most cost effective. Graham Lamp Black also works well. And most of my paint I get at Blick, and I have a link below. If you shop through my link, it helps my channel. It doesn't cost you anything. I love Blick. I buy my Matisse paints at Blick, the Atelier, Amsterdam. So it's my favorite art store. Okay. So, and this is how I get so dirty. Y'all are like, how does she get so much paint on her hands? Well, this is how. It's hard to describe the perfect consistency. I can tell you that there is this weird thing that happens when you have a good consistency, and it's not a metallic paint. It doesn't always happen with metallic paints. And one thing to note about metallic paints is sometimes they need a little bit more Floetrol because they're thicker. But you can see how, since I already had a good mix in there, this is mixing in a lot easier. Amsterdam is pretty cost effective, and it's creamy, and even though it's a medium body paint, it kind of acts like a soft body paint. So it works pretty nicely. So, okay, so it's all mixed in. And what a good indicator is with a regular tube paint, maybe not a metallic, but if you scrape the side and it separates like heavy cream does, that's a good sign. And then when you go like this, you see how it's bouncing back? I don't know how well you can see that, but it kind of snaps back. That's a good indication. If it's just pouring from here and it's not doing that, I would say it's too thin. If it's glopping and not dripping any, it's probably too thick. If it's too thick, it sinks, generally. If it's too thin, you might have a great blowout, and then your cells and lacing may not hold their structure. So, aren't these cute little paddles Colourarte has now? So cute. So you have to play around with it. The ratios, this part of this part of that, those are really just a guide. Every paint is different. A heavy body paint might require more Floetrol. A certain brand of paint a metallic paint might require more Floetrol. Just know that a lot of what goes into the bloom recipe is a science experiment. So be careful that you don't blame the product, because there is a lot involved in making sure that they mix up properly and all the ingredients have to gel together. Some paints work well for blooms in your pouring medium, some don't. Some cell activators work, some don't. There's not like a perfect master list. A lot of it is trial and error. You are going to mix things, think everything is fine, and something's gonna fail. It's just, that's the frustrating part. It's a super rewarding technique, but that is the frustrating part. You can completely ace everything you do one day, and the next day you can use the same exact stuff. The weather might be different, the climate might be different. There is a lot that goes into it. So give yourself a break if you're new to this technique. You're not gonna probably master it in a matter of weeks, maybe even months. Some people do, but most people don't. And so don't throw the towel in and get super discouraged if you're one of those people like me who wants to be great at things right away, because there are going to be days that you're not great at it. I usually label my cell activator so I know when I mixed it. So if it's not performing well, I know that it probably is old. If it is not old, then I know I might need to add more paint or more Floetrol to it. So again, if you want to buy Australian Floetrol and you don't have it, there's a link in the description box below. Save you a little bit of money. Gets here pretty quickly. It does last a long time. There are ways to make US Floetrol work. Just because I have Australian Floetrol, I choose to use it because it's easier. I will probably maybe experiment with some of those just so it'll be kind of available on the channel. But right now, that's what's working. So let me show you a couple of things, and we'll mix up a couple of things real quick, and then I know this video is like super long, so I'm gonna try to wrap it up for today. Be right back. All right, I'm gonna try to move quickly. I'm gonna zoom you guys in just a little bit since I'm gonna be mixing. So these little cups I have on Amazon. I will put them in my Amazon shop. Some of them are cheap, some of them are not. These don't break when you close the lid. And they provide a little bit more airtight seal than a condiment cup, but I use those too, so. But these you can wash out and reuse. So we're gonna put a little bit of our pouring medium. I'm gonna start with the pigment. I also get questions about how to mix interference pigments for the bloom. The Bling It and the regular interference, I mix them the exact same way. So I just brought them to show you, but I mix them the same way. One thing that's unique about pigments is it helps to put pigments in a smaller batch of your pouring medium first, dissolve them really well, and then add more. Now, I cannot 100% speak for all pigments. This is what I do with primary elements. Other pigment companies may ask that you disperse into some of your varnish first, or into like a Liquitex pouring medium. I have done that before. I have accidentally not done that when they ask, and mixed it the same way without any issue. I think that that advice generally helps to break down particles that may be big. But I have never had to do that with primary elements, so I'm just going to show you primary elements because that's mostly what I use. And so I'm just going to put a little bit in here. I will also say you don't need a lot of primary elements. So a lot of people dump a whole lot into their cup because they're very, very pigmented. Now this is one of the glitz colors. It's called Fairy Wings. So primary elements are semi-transparent except for the glitz line. The glitz line is semi-opaque, and so they have a little bit more opacity than the regular primary elements. They're really, really beautiful. Sorry about the noise. Now remember the trick I told you that you can put a little bit of gel gloss just to help with the way they hold their shape. I'll probably do that later, but it will work both ways. It just kind of helps stabilize things. I say I'll do that later, but I'll probably do it now so you can see. So I'm just going to start off with this much, and because I really like high color saturation and I love this color. And then I'm going to mix it, and if I need more, I can add more. But generally, a little goes a long way. I have pouring medium down the side of my cup. So you just mix, mix, mix. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And make sure you can see that. Now you are mixing something that has very small particles. So if you want, you can wear a mask just to, keep from inhaling that. It's just generally not a bad idea. Let me show you this color. It's fantastic. The flash is gonna mess with us a little bit, but you see it's starting to break down. My autofocus is tripping here. Okay. It's gonna start to break down a little bit, but just stir it really, really well. It's a beautiful, beautiful color. Also, you can save 20% off of anything on the Colourarte website with using my discount code. It's Mandy1120, all lowercase, all one word, and it's listed below. That's where I get my primary elements. That's where I get a lot of my resin pigments. That's where I get the interference colors. I'm about to show you a Prizm pour color. They're fabulous. So this video is running really long. Okay, so now I'm just going to add in a little bit more. See if I've got the color where I want it. And it's mixing up beautifully. My autofocus is acting up. I'm so sorry if that's blurring for you guys. I need to get away from the camera, but I wanted you to see the color. So, it's still very vibrant, very beautiful. Going back to the untinted house paint, if you use one that does not dry clear and has too much titanium white in it, it will mute your colors. I bought a gallon of one when the old one I used to use ran out, and I was like, why are all my pigments so light? And that was it. It was a great paint, but it just did not work well. Okay, so then that one's done. Now these little stir sticks are also available on the Colourarte website. The Wildflower set is back for a limited time through the end of May 30th. And if you order that, you do get one free, but they're super cute. Okay. The next thing I get a lot of questions on is how do you mix Prizm Pour, which is a paint the Colourarte makes, with these beautiful new bottles for your blooms. Now, there are instructions right on the side that show you. It says not to use high quantities of Floetrol because it mats the color. It also causes the in them to break up. I'm trying to get my autofocus to quit it and I flipped my camera. It tells you what ratios you can dilute. So you can add a little bit of water. I don't like to add water to my bloom recipe, so you shake it up really well. These really should be stored on their side so the mica doesn't all settle to the bottom. I should have shooken it up before I started this, but that would mean I was super organized. But they're super sparkly. If you've never seen these, there's 12 colors now. This is one of the new colors that just came out called Heartthrob, and they are absolutely gorgeous. They have the body of like a medium body paint, but they are absolutely spectacular. So, but some people say they can't get them to work in blooms. I use them in blooms all the time. So I'm going to mix them up the same. I'm going to add a little bit of pouring medium to the bottom. And how much is really a matter of preference. It's just to get the consistency you want and the color saturation. So if I want it to be darker, I'll add more. This color is gorgeous. I'm going to add a little bit more. You may not be able to see it, but they're so sparkly, they almost look like they have glitter in them, but they don't. They're just gorgeous. Beautiful paint line. And those new bottles make them even easier to use than before. But an absolutely gorgeous color. Check that out. So I'm going to add a little bit more pouring medium. I would say they are probably between, they probably have the viscosity of like an Amsterdam paint, but they're, because they have that mica in them, they feel kind of like a metallic, if that makes sense. But that's a good consistency. I'm going to add just a little bit more paint. And if I wanted to thicken it up at all, I could add just a tiny dab of that golden gel gloss. And I'll show that to you toward the end for people who are like, this video is too flippin' long. So I feel ya. Mixing videos are never short. That's perhaps why it took me so long to get one done. But yeah, heartthrob. Gorgeous. Now that's how I mix them for blooms. You can mix them lots of different ways if you're going to do other techniques. I would not recommend using Floetrol, regular old American Floetrol and water with primary elements, or Prizm pour, generally speaking, because Floetrol is not an acrylic binder, and it will break down paints that aren't bound together with a binder. Now this has a binder in it, but there are ways to make some of that work. Some of that is using the pouring mediums that Colourarte offers, of course. And then golden regular gel gloss can be used as well. So if you watch my recent Dutch pour video, that's what I did with primary elements. Now I'm going to show you a fluid paint, which means it's watery but highly pigmented. Now this is a Matisse color, one of my favorites. I have the soft body, which is the flow, and I have the fluid in this one, and Australian Red Violet. I can't show you a golden one because I don't have a golden one out here, but this is a pretty big bottle. So yes, they're expensive, but it's a big bottle and the color saturation is really amazing. So this is Matisse Southern Ocean Blue. I get this at Blick. Again, you can use my link. Feel free to shop away. I love Matisse paints. So I don't even know if I've opened this yet. Sometimes I use these to make my flow paints last longer. So I might use a flow, and then if I want more color saturation, I'll add a couple drops of this. So this is Southern Ocean Blue. I just got it on my fingers. So that's awesome. It is a beautiful color. So you can see I didn't put a ton in there. Super pigmented. Now I'm just going to add some more pouring medium. But that's a fantastic color. I'm a person who loves most all teal and turquoise colors, and this is a particular favorite of mine. Like I like golden teal. It's a pretty color, but if I had to pick a color that was a little bit on the lighter shade, I would do Atelier Turquoise Light. That's a beautiful color. I think golden teal is a little self-centered. It likes to take over all the paintings. It's so pretty though. It's just not my favorite shade. So there we go. It's about right. Now if you use a fluid paint and your paints are too thin because the paint is thin, sometimes that happens to me when I use Atelier because the paints are very pigmented, but the fluid paints are very thin. You can add, again, the heavy gel gloss just a little bit to thicken them up, because you do want your paints to be consistent. You don't want one that's super watery and one that's super thick. Occasionally it's going to happen. We're not chemists, you know, well, at least I'm not. Now I'm going to do a tube paint with you. This is not a heavy body. I didn't get a heavy body. I probably should have. This is an Amsterdam paint, so it's a medium body. But you would mix it the same. If it's a heavy body, if you need to thin it out, I already kind of told you the tricks for that. And if you watch my videos, I do mix paint sometimes, and you would have seen me do that on occasion, thin things out. You can also sometimes have to thin it out if it's old and it's just thickened up. So not a ton. this is one advantage that you have with doing the bloom technique. It might be expensive to get started, but you use a lot less paint, like this kind of paint. You might use a lot of house paint, but you use a lot less actual paint. So then most of my more expensive paints, higher end paints, I save and use for blooms because a little goes a long way. Whereas if I do a flip cup or an open cup or whatever, I'm using quite a bit of that. So it used to bum me out to run out of paint so fast. But with blooms, you can make your paint last a long time. So yeah, here we go. Now this is, it's still a good consistency, so I'm not going to thin it down. But if this were to thicken up, you can thin it down with the tricks that I told you about. Now I'm going to just show you that tiny trick that I mentioned about the gel gloss for the pigment. I'm not going to put much because I honestly have a pretty decent consistency the way it is right now. But I just want to show you that you're not going to use a lot. Golden has a really good gel gloss, regular and heavy gloss. I have not used the soft body. It works like a charm. I use the gel gloss and water to put primary elements in my Dutch pours, which are a huge game changer. It works really, really well. Liquitex has one too. I have not experimented with theirs, but lots of people have, and had great results. So I would start with a tiny bit, like a tiny bit. You don't need a lot because this is like adding a heavy body paint to your mix. And then you can always add more if you need to. But like I said, this mixture is about right as it is. So adding the gel gloss is just going to help it really be sturdy as we continue to mix it into the mix. Ideally, if you were going to do this with all of your pigments and your thinner paints, you should mix it into your pouring medium so it's thoroughly mixed, because now this is like having to add a heavy body paint into a paint that's already mixed really well. So that's just to give you an idea of how much to use. What I would probably do going forward would be to mix it in here. Make sure it's mixed really well, because you really don't want to be breaking down a big glob of paint in here. And that's what it is. Like that big glob of gel is like mixing up a blob of paint. It takes a long time to dissolve it, but it won't take much. And I'll keep working this through off camera, but I just wanted to show you, like, it doesn't take much and we have a good consistency. So the same would be true if your mix was too thin, if one of your paints was too thin. So yeah, so I'm not going to do a bloom today because this video is already super long. But I will be doing some soon, obviously. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. I do a lot with this recipe on my channel. I try to share tips with you. I try to share my fails with you as much as I can, because I think it's important that people know what really goes into the effort to be successful at this technique. Again, I didn't create this technique. I'm not trying to take credit for it. It's an amazing technique. Shelley's an amazing artist. I sometimes get private messages asking me to give lessons. I'm not going to do that. That, to me, would be unethical. She developed the technique and already has a class. I don't mind sharing the tips that I learn along the way, which I think all of us are doing that. But please don't get hurt feelings if you ask for private lessons for blooms. I don't mind sharing the tips, but that doesn't feel like the right thing to do. So if you do want to take the class, I will put my coupon code in there for you. Like I said, you don't have to, but you will learn something from it. And I think you do continue to learn along with other students like myself that continue to learn. So there's a lot of additional learning that goes on in the group. So like that's what I said in the beginning. There's 3 fundamentals: the pillow, your pouring mix, and your cell activator. How you get there, what you use, what works well for you, that's going to vary. What works for me may not work for you. I have a lot of artist friends that use different ratios than I do and get amazing results. So not everything is the same. I'm in Texas, it's hot here. So if I were to do like a 4-to-1 ratio on my cell activator, I think it would be too thin, but that works well for lots of people. So anyway, I hope this was helpful for you. Feel free to save this and refer back to it. Leave me a comment, let me know if it was helpful, if it helped answer some questions for you. Like I said, Colourarte discount code below. I also have the discount code for the Australian Floetrol Boom Gel below. My Blick link is below. Working on my Amazon storefront. That will be below soon. Join our Fluid Art Friends Facebook group. The link is also below. Anyway, I love you guys. Appreciate all your support. If you're not subscribed, we'd love if you join our family. And if you are and you're a faithful watcher, I so appreciate you. And yeah, so have a great day, everybody. Take care.